Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We'll be starting in a few minutes. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll get started in just a few moments. Thank you for being here. Welcome, and thanks for joining us. We'll get started in just a few moments. Thanks so much for being here. All right. Well, thank you for everyone who's joining us today. We have a couple of announcements as everyone logs on. First, we are recording this session, so it will be available in Excel events as well as on the Alliance website within the next 2 weeks. You'll also notice this session allows you to have cameras and mics on, but please keep them off for now. We'll have time at the end of the session for Q&A when you're welcome to unmute, or you're always welcome to drop your questions in the Q&A tab to the right of the viewing window. You can also use the chat to the right. It looks like we're ready to get started, so I am going to go ahead and hand it over to our speaker, Jonathan. Jonathan, take it away.
Thank you, Jenna. Good afternoon, folks. I hope that you are all enjoying the conference and it's all very informative. This session will be on the topic of the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, and its relation to the Farm Bill. We will be talking about a little bit about the Farm Bill itself as an overview. We'll be talking about the SNAP program more in detail. And then we will talk about future opportunities and threats in the 2020 and the next year's Farm Bill. And we'll talk a little bit about advocacy strategies and tactics. And so let's get started. Next slide. My name is, if I didn't mention before, my name is Jonathan Owascu. I'm Manager of Legislative Affairs at Feeding America. Feeding America is the largest anti-hunger organization in the U.S. We're a network of over 200 food banks, 21 state food bank associations, 60,000 partner agencies, and frontline organizations as well. We are also the largest SNAP application assister in the US. So our network members have a lot of experience working with SNAP recipients and other folks who are registering or for various domestic assistance programs. Next slide. So we'll start off with a Farm Bill overview. I know that in the last hour, there was a Farm Bill session devoted solely to talking about the Farm Bill. So only go over it briefly here for those who weren't able to attend that session. And we'll kind of set the stage for our conversation on the SNAP program. Next slide. So the Farm Bill is a piece of legislation, omnibus piece of legislation that is passed every 5 years. It encompasses all sorts of programs ranging from supports for agricultural producers, agricultural conservation, energy, some parts of energy policy, and as we'll see, a large portion of the bill is devoted towards domestic food assistance programs. You'll see that the Farm Bill first originated during the Great Depression, and all of the related struggles in the agriculture industry. And it's usually passed every 5 years. You can see the last 18 that have been enacted, pretty much on schedule on that 5-year timeline, with some variations. The last one was passed in 2018, so that Farm Bill expires in 2023, next year, at the end of the fiscal year, which is the end of September. So Congress will have until then to work up a bill, go through the process to hopefully get a new Farm Bill passed on time. And they have been preparing in this past year, but now that we are getting into a new Congress, the preparations, the committee hearings, all sorts of things will start to kick up even more. Next slide. So this slide has a basic breakdown of the different titles. As you can see, there's 12 titles were in the 2018 Farm Bill. A lot of them make up only a small portion. A large part of the non-nutrition title spending is devoted towards commodity crops. So if you think of your corn, grains, soybeans, things like that, are going to be, those programs are going to be supporting those kinds of crops. There's much less support for produce and vegetables, things like that. There are pretty sizable portions that are devoted towards agricultural conservation, things like agricultural credit, rural development, forestry is included. So there's a wide variety of things that affect agriculture and the rural economy in general. But as you'll notice, a large part of the Farm Bill, most of it is domestic nutrition assistance programs, and most of that is the SNAP program, which is why sometimes you might hear critics of SNAP programs say, it's not a Farm Bill, it's a food stamp bill. This is kind of where they look at, graphs like this and they say, most of the Farm Bill is devoted to domestic assistance programs, without realizing just how important those programs are to the Farm Bill process in the agriculture sector. So next slide. So the main Farm Bill nutrition provisions are listed below. So you'll see some really critical anti-hunger provisions here that you all should be familiar with. The SNAP program, of course, being the main program. And along with SNAP, there's also related SNAP funding dealing with nutrition education, employment and training programs, outreach, other administrative goals. You have the emergency food assistance programs, which is commodity purchases by USDA to be distributed through emergency feeding organizations like Art Network, food banks, food pantries, all sorts of emergency feeding organizations eligible to receive some of that funding. You also have Commodity Supplemental Food Program, which is focused towards seniors. You have FDPIR, which is focused on supporting Native communities. You have nutrition incentive programs to, look at ways to incentivize healthy eating without penalizing recipients. And there's there's various programs that are a lot smaller, but are aimed to incentivize different market behaviors, to encourage healthy eating, to support support communities in more niche ways. Next slide. So we'll turn to the main topic of this presentation, the SNAP program. The SNAP program, formerly called food stamps, was changed to be called the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program in 2008, in the 2008 Farm Bill. It is the core of our nation's anti-hunger system, serving more than 42 million Americans. And a large part of SNAP policy is dictated by the Farm Bill. And so the program itself is reauthorized every 5 years, but also crafters of the Farm Bill can change all sorts of types of policies, from eligibility, for oversight, for ways it's administered, all sorts of things. So next slide. So as we look at SNAP at a glance, in FY 2021, a monthly average of 44.5 million individuals participated in SNAP. Federal costs of SNAP were 112.6 billion, and so this is the cost of the program stands out. This is the largest cost it's ever been over the past few years, and of course, a lot of that has to do with both the COVID-19 pandemic and benefit increases related to that, and increase in need as well, but also the update of the Thrifty Food Plan, which we'll get to later. But from the onlooker who's not familiar, someone who may not know a lot about SNAP or maybe more critical of SNAP, will see those spending numbers just keep going up and up, and will want to ask some questions about that. And so, that the upward trajectory of SNAP spending without context can cause partisan divides and things like that. And so hopefully we'll go over in this presentation how to contextualize that, and how to address some of the spending concerns from those who may be critical of the SNAP program and want to see it change in some way. The second bullet point is just to show kind of how large a SNAP program is in relation to the charitable sector. Feeding America represents private charitable food sector, emergency food organizations. We represent a good portion of them, and for every one meal that our network provides, SNAP provides 9 meals. So it has a huge impact, and it just goes to show that the federal investment is key. And for those who are in the field, in emergency feeding organizations or other organizations, that federal investment is just so key to the work that all of y'all do in working in nonprofits or wherever you might work to address hunger and food insecurity. And then the third point is just that a large portion of SNAP recipients are children, the disabled, elderly. So those who are not in working age populations, that's always a key reminder to critics of the program, how a lot of talk is always surrounded around working age population, work requirements, and things like that. But it's always a key reminder that a large portion of recipients are children, those who can't work, folks who are in dire need or unable to work due to disability. And so that's always important to keep in mind, to just look at things from the outset. Next slide. Some other points. The SNAP program is open-ended, mandatory appropriations. What this means is that the funding levels don't need to be addressed by Congress every year. Once the program is authorized in the Farm Bill, the spending levels automatically increase or decrease based on level of need. So if more folks apply or there's more recipients, the costs are going to go up. If there's less, the costs are going to go down. And Congress doesn't need congressional approval every year through the appropriations process, the government funding process, to make sure the program keeps running. So that's a key distinction as we move into a farm bill, where, if there is no new farm bill, if they do an extension, which is if they can't get it done in time, likely would happen, all of the SNAP programs would remain the same at the same levels. It would still keep operating. There will be no cuts, extension. So that's always important to keep in mind. There are very few aspects of the farm bill that would actually, if a farm bill wasn't passed, fall apart, but nutrition programs are not one of them. And so the way that Congress has designed the SNAP program, it would take, a huge kind of a major congressional change for the program to be altered dramatically. And so, Congress only gets a chance to address it every 5 years, basically. And so another thing to keep in mind is that the SNAP funding, while most of it goes towards the actual benefits, there's a lot of SNAP funding that goes to states to run employment and training programs, nutrition education funding. There are different aspects to this SNAP. And one other thing that I wanted to add is that the SNAP program is administered by the states. A large part of it is anyway. And so states are in charge of eligibility to a great extent. They're in charge of running employment and training programs, a lot of the different administrative aspects of the program. And so there's large variations in policy as a result, as we'll see. Next slide. All right, so let's talk a little bit about eligibility rules in SNAP. So under the traditional eligibility, applicant households must meet gross income, net income, and asset tests. And so the main number that folks usually see is the 130%. Gross income needs to be at or below 130% of federal poverty level. That is basically the federal standard. Basically, like, states can make that percentage higher, but that's basically the lowest it can be, as far as states can't go to a lesser number, a more strict number. But states can, in various ways, make that threshold higher and provide more accessibility to the program. There's also net income and asset tests, and the one thing a couple things to point out about that is that the SNAP program, the way it's designed, it discourages saving in a variety of ways because there is an asset test. So if you make a purchase of a car or you make a purchase of some other things, that might be counted against you as far as when everything is calculated to see if you're eligible for benefits. So the SNAP program eligibility rules have some sort of negative incentives in that way. It could be potentially approved upon in a future farm bill. Another thing to point out is that there's just a myriad of different rules related to what counts and what doesn't count. And so I won't go into all those here about what counts towards income threshold, eligibility, and that kinds of things. But it's important to note there's different deductions. For example, there's a earned income deduction. If you're a working recipient, you can deduct a portion of your earnings, for example, and that'd be an example of deductions. So there's various deductions, various things that count for or against these limits. There's a second way that an individual can qualify for SNAP, and that would be categorical eligibility. Essentially, if it's a lot easier way to convey eligibility. Basically, if a recipient is already participating in another means tested program, so temporary assistance for needy families, TANF, for example, in many states, they would just automatically qualify for SNAP without having to go through kind of this more rigorous eligibility process. And states have used that to great effect in making sure that everybody who has a need and is in other programs is also qualified and eligible for SNAP. And there's a third way, which is commonly called broad-based categorical eligibility. And what this is it's an option that states can exercise to increase that income threshold, basically. If what it means in essence is if an individual is receiving a non-cash TANF benefit. So essentially what that means is, anything, if they're approaching the threshold for TANF and they receive some sort of benefit related to that, and they can receive that at anywhere from 185% of the poverty level to 200% of the poverty level, they can also automatically qualify for SNAP. So what this means in essence is that in many states, the income threshold is a lot higher. It can go up to 200%, I believe. Some states still have it at 130% and don't take advantage of this, but this is a key flexibility that states can use to increase access to the SNAP program. And as we'll see, it's always a target. That option is always a target by critics of the SNAP program. And then lastly, under traditional rules, individuals who are ineligible include many non-citizens. Most full-time college students are not eligible, and there's been calls to change that. Usually the student needs to qualify, they need to fall within a specific demographic or need to be working half-time or less. Also, individuals with certain drug felony convictions are ineligible for the program. That's also been called upon to change. And lastly, individuals can become ineligible by breaking program rules too many times. And there's some other ways I won't get into, but there's definitely a solid list of folks who would be ineligible for the program. Next slide. So another key aspect of the SNAP program is that it has a work requirement. And there are two main work requirements for the SNAP program. First of all, the work requirement only applies to adults between the ages of 18 and 60, I believe. And so working age populations who aren't disabled, able to work. And so for those individuals to be eligible for the SNAP program, barring any sort of waiver or anything like that, they need to essentially register for work or follow directions from the state SNAP agency. And so different states, SNAP agencies have different ways of doing job search and training. This is a less rigorous, as you'll see, for able-bodied adults without dependents, but it's nevertheless a huge burden for working families, and it can be hard to work with SNAP agencies, particularly if the job is not a conventional job. Perhaps it's a gig economy job, or a job that it's hard to provide pay stubs and stuff like that. It can be really difficult for applicants to prove that they're in certain types of jobs. It makes them really difficult to really be able to fulfill a lot of these requirements. And then there's a second, more strict work requirement, which is for what's called able-bodied adults without dependents. So those are aged between 18 and 49, do not have dependents in the household. Folks in that group are subject to rather strict work requirements. And so essentially, they're required to work at least 20 hours a week, participate in employment training program 20 hours a week, or participate in the state's workfare program. And another aspect of these work requirements is there's a large punitive aspect to them. There's the time limit that basically limits able-bodied adults without dependents to only 3 months of SNAP benefits out of a 36-month period, unless if they're not able to fulfill these requirements. So those are rather strict and punitive burdens, and usually this is one of the aspects that tends to be have a bigger partisan divide than other issues. Next slide. Some other things I want to mention that are not related to the Farm Bill, but still SNAP related. Just some kind of background and updates over the last few years. So in response to the COVID pandemic, Congress passed several pieces of legislation to increase benefit allotments for SNAP over the term of the public health emergency. Those are still in place in many states, but they are on the verge of ending as Congress and the White House debates ending the public health emergency. Another key aspect was the Congress added flexibilities to eligibility, work requirements, and other aspects of the SNAP program. And so, for example, able-bodied adults without dependent requirements were waived by Congress, and those are steadily coming back in different states. Again, though, a lot of this is tied to the federal public health emergency, which is still in effect, though states are taking steps to transition back to the normal work requirements. And then the third major thing would be the Thrifty Food Plan revision and benefit increases. And we'll talk about that in the next slide. So could we go to the next slide? So in 2021, the Biden administration updated the Thrifty Food Plan, which is what is indexed to, basically SNAP benefits are indexed to the Thrifty Food Plan. So when the Thrifty Food Plan is increased, SNAP benefits are also increased. This resulted in an increase of the maximum SNAP benefit allotment of 21% in 2022. As you can see, average benefit will be $1.80 per person per meal, increase of 48 cents. And so this is a huge change to the benefit allotment. It doesn't change eligibility, but it changes those who are eligible, adds more benefits to their monthly allotment. And so, this is seen as a major success. Is something that will be a lot harder, something that advocates of SNAP will need to fight to basically, keep that process intact and really champion that Thrifty Food Plan increase. But it's an area, since the administration did it, it's less likely that Congress will have the opportunity to make big changes to it. But nevertheless, very big, very important improvement. Next slide. All right, so as we get into the 2023 Farm Bill process, SNAP is one of the most divisive partisan issues, unfortunately, in the Farm Bill process. I think part of that, as mentioned before, as folks who don't have the context will see that such a large portion of the Farm Bill is dedicated towards nutrition programs. And so, unfortunately, this creates kind of a adversarial environment where different interests in the Farm Bill, agricultural conservation, all sorts of interests fight for pieces of that pie, funding-wise, and also complain about the size of the nutrition program as it relates to the Farm Bill. But the debate over SNAP there's a lot of issues to that. Spending is just one of them, but historically there have been divides over work requirements, over broad-based category eligibility, in general size of the program. So as we get into it, would expect there to be similar pushback, unfortunately, towards some of the current SNAP policies by incoming Congress. Next slide. All right, so I'll quickly go over some of the changes to the 2018 Farm Bill. To set the stage, the 2018 Farm Bill ended up being kind of more of a status quo Farm Bill, kept a lot of the programs the same. Originally, the Republican-led House passed a Farm Bill that had a good bit of cuts to SNAP program, making work requirements more stringent, things like that. A lot of those were cut out in the final Farm Bill, and so it ended up being more of a status quo Farm Bill, kept programs the way they are. But there were a few changes, and I'll talk about them here. So, a lot of the changes we're dealing towards like administrative aspects, as you'll see, to the program. Basically, for example, they created a clearinghouse to reduce fraud, duplication, that kind of thing. I would say one of the biggest areas that, biggest harms to the SNAP program, probably reducing states' ability to waive the able-bodied adults without dependent work requirements. Under previous law, states had the option to waive up to 15% of the able-bodied adult without dependent working population work requirements due to labor conditions and other reasons. And it was important flexibility for states to be able to waive that work requirement for a certain portion of the population. That percentage was cut by Congress down from 15% to 12%. So states will have less the ability to waive those work requirements in the future unless changed. But overall, there were threats to the Farm Bill in 2018, and kind of in the end, there was a bipartisan consensus to pass a more status quo Farm Bill that didn't have a lot of those SNAP cuts in them. Next slide. Next slide. So I'll talk briefly about the upcoming opportunities and threats in this 2023 Farm Bill process. First, let's talk about what we can expect from the upcoming Congress. So with the election results being almost finalized, we'll see that Democrats will retain control of the Senate, either with a 50 seat margin or a 50 seat kind of Vice President Harris majority, or a 51 seat traditional majority in the Senate. Republicans are very likely to regain control of the House. I think some news outlets have already called that, but they're favored to win at least 220 seats, and it should be between 220 and 222 seat majorities. A very slim majority, but a majority nonetheless. It means that their Republicans will control the committees in the House. It means that if they want to pass, messaging bills or stuff like that, and they can get the entire conference on board, they can do that. They can block, what the Senate wants to do. So a slim majority still allows the House to have a big impact on the process. But as we'll see, that it doesn't. They will need the Senate and President Biden to follow suit, but the Senate and President Biden have also a huge impact on this process. So as I said, higher chance of a status quo farm bill. I'd say major SNAP cuts are unlikely in this environment, but major SNAP improvements, increases to benefits are also unlikely in this environment, as mentioned. So a big focus on a lot of the members will be focused on program improvements, modernizations, increased focus on nutrition with bipartisan support. So working in bipartisan ways is going to be a big focus for a lot of members of Congress. And this is also in the context of the White House Conference on Hunger, Health, and Nutrition, which laid out a lot of those policy priorities that people are going to pursue, and which have some bipartisan support as well. Things that come to mind would be, nutrition stuff, how food is medicine. Those are areas that seem to have some bipartisan support at this point in time. As mentioned before, during 2018, Republicans controlled House, Senate, and the presidency, and still were not able to enact those cuts. The Senate, in the end, was able to, push through a more status quo bill, and really tamp down kind of those major changes. And then, as we saw, the administration in 2019 went ahead and tried to make some of those work requirement changes and cuts happen through the administrative process, but that never came to fruition. And so kind of those efforts fizzled out, thankfully. But we'll likely see the House come up with a bill that looks similar to what it passed in 2018. In 2014, it was a lot more complex of a process, but it's the last time there was a split Congress that needed to pass a farm bill. President Obama had a big impact in his veto threat to protect SNAP. And this ended up with there were some changes that some consider harmful, but a big part of the SNAP cuts were eventually tamped down. So we'll go to the next slide. So I want to go over some of the main challenges I see with two main threats to the SNAP program in the Farm Bill process, based on largely what House Republicans want to change in their agenda as it relates to food, agriculture, nutrition, labor and employment, and federal spending. And so we'll go over each of these and talk a little bit about them. And so, as mentioned before, the Thrifty Food Plan is something that's been controversial on a partisan basis. I think it's more broadly popular with the American public, but it was opposed. At least the process was opposed by House and Senate Republicans. They've announced intention to provide oversight to that. Although as far as I know, there's no serious effort to revert it. It's more of an oversight kind of task, and something that they're going to bring criticism to and bring kind of oversight to the process. And that oversight might lead to some harmful policies dealing with future presidencies and their ability to change the Thrifty Food Plan. And so that's something to keep an eye out for. But as far as reverting the program, I don't see any serious threats to that at this point in time. Another item that will almost assuredly be in the House Republican version of the Farm Bill will be expansion of work requirements. And so there's a big push to increase work requirements, make them more stringent, raise the age to 60 for able-bodied adults without dependents would be an example, and include some parents with dependents in that able-bodied adult without dependent population. So some of those proposals, adults with dependents would be required to do the same stringent requirements as able-bodied adults without dependents currently. And so there are many, I'm not going to get into all of them, but there are a lot of different proposals out there from Republicans and how they want to change this. But this is going to be a main point of contention that advocates need to be cognizant of as they go into the Farm Bill. Another big item that is looking like it will be proposed by Republicans is eliminating the ability for states to enact a broad-based categorical eligibility, as mentioned before. This is an important tool that state and flexibility states have to increase that income threshold and increase participation in the program. And there's been calls to outright eliminate it. There's been other calls to just limit how much states can go, like how high they can go up to. Might not be able to go to 200% anymore, but there are definitely going to be proposals to change that in some way that will negatively affect the current process. And then another related issue is the waiver option, as mentioned before. There's proposals to eliminate those waivers for the states to waive the work requirements for able-bodied adults without dependents. Next slide. So I want to list some possible positive but more unlikely changes to SNAP in the 2023 Farm Bill. I'm sure a lot of the organizations that you are a part of will be, as our organization as well, will be supporting these policies, or many of these policies at least. However, given the current makeup of Congress, it's fairly unlikely that these will see consideration in the Farm Bill process. So these include things like increasing benefit amounts through changing the thrifty food plan to low-cost food plan. Basically, USDA uses the lowest cost food plan as thrifty food plan. There is a higher option that would increase benefits if it was tied to the low-cost food plan. And so that is something that definitely would be good. It would increase benefit adequacy, but very unlikely to happen considering the increases in thrifty in the past year. There's also extending SNAP to Puerto Rico and U.S. territories. Currently, residents of Puerto Rico are not eligible for SNAP program. There's a separate program, the block grant program, the nutrition assistance program, but the benefits are less, not as adequate, and it requires more continual maintenance appropriations. The funding is not as insured as the SNAP program. That is unlikely to happen as well, based on the cost, but also there's issues around income tax. Puerto Rico doesn't pay, or many residents of Puerto Rico don't pay income tax. And so that is used as kind of a reason why, for critics of the program, that the SNAP program should not be extended. So unlikely to see a major change with that policy. There's also just general boosting minimum monthly benefits. This is important. I haven't seen too much chatter on this, but depending on the costs of this, if this is a big cost, going to increase the costs by a lot, likely won't see consideration in the Farm Bill. There's also lifting the three-month time limit to finding work. I think this is fairly unlikely because because of COVID flexibilities, first off, in that the time limits are just coming back, so I think it would be unlikely for Republicans to support any kind of lifting of the time limits at this point in time. And then these other ones, I think they're good policies, but at the end of the day, I don't think there's enough Republicans that would be able to support those for them to be seriously considered. Go to the next slide. And so I'd say this is the area that's most likely that we'll see some kind of bipartisan consensus on, or some kind of change in the Farm Bill process. And so, one of those things would be increasing SNAP choice or increasing flexibilities. One issue is that under SNAP, most hot and prepared meals or most recipients can't purchase hot and prepared meals with their SNAP dollars, which that can range anything from buying from fast food, but also buying rotisserie chicken. So there's a wide variety of things that that policy restricts. That I think there's a bigger consensus, bipartisan consensus, in lifting that ban and allowing hot and prepared meals to be purchased through the SNAP program. Also here is there's increased effort to increase access to online vendors, food delivery services, just increasing the ways that folks can use their SNAP dollars with technology and things like that. Improving the employment and training programs, increasing SNAP education funding, retaining some of the flexibilities to the SNAP program. One example would be the telephonic signature flexibility. It just makes it easier for folks to recertify with the agency, and it makes it easier time for applicants to be able to access this program. I think there's an outside shot that they change eligibility rules related to the drug felony ban. It really depends on the mood of Congress and whether criminal justice reform has seen increased support in Republican circles lately, but we'll see on that one. Reframe the attrition debate from SNAP restrictions to SNAP incentives. There's some in Congress, mostly Republicans, but some Democrats have called for restricting SNAP recipients' choices to ban things like sugary beverages and stuff like that. I think there's an opportunity to find a bipartisan consensus for healthy eating through as a reward or incentive to increase benefits. So it's important to reframe that debate, I think. And there's also other areas of eligibility that I could see there being changes to, increasing the earned income deduction. So that would encourage eligibility, more eligibility throughout someone's process of economic mobility upward. They would be able to keep more of that money and it wouldn't be counted against their eligibility. And then eliminating the asset test, some have called for on both sides, because as mentioned before, it discourages saving and really harms those who purchase assets, illiquid assets. It really hurts their eligibility for the program. Next slide. So I'll talk briefly. I have about 5 minutes. So I'll talk briefly about 5 minutes before I want to open up to Q&A, rather. So I'll talk briefly about advocacy strategies. So next slide. So this is for our network. This is an example of an advocacy strategy for our network. So obviously our network, is different from other organizations. So every organization is going to be different. They're going to have different communities they work in, different networks, different avenues. But for us, one of my primary jobs is to engage members of Congress in DC. And so we have our network members and the communities that we serve fly in sometimes to those Capitol Hill meetings, participate, briefings, so engage with members of Congress. Another important way to engage is being at events or hosting events for members of Congress when they're in their home district, whether that's at a a soup kitchen or food pantry, or kind of a larger event, like a symposium or a conference, press event. That's a good way to really show that Congressperson the efforts of your organization in fighting hunger and food insecurity. Another important aspect, particularly when it comes to the Farm Bill, is building partnerships at state and local level, particularly with organizations that in the private sector, organizations like agriculture and farming groups, organizations working in food industry, local growers. These are all these parties are benefited by a strong Farm Bill. And so, they're, as mentioned before, the Farm Bill process can sometimes create an adversarial process, but groups have had more success kind of coming together around shared principles. And so in the past, you've seen a lot of groups coalesce around keeping a strong nutrition title and keeping benefit adequacy of SNAP at a high level. And then there's other different actions. Sign-on letters is a good example where you sign on, different groups sign on and send a letter to their local state or federal officials outlining what they support, working with local organizations, community organizations, faith-based, nonprofit sector, health, and other key partners. But this will vary depending on your organization. Next slide. Just want to go over some key points of kind of how to talk about SNAP with different audiences, and kind of, just want to go over these briefly of kind of, if I'm speaking with a member of Congress or I'm speaking with a group that has, supportive, neutral, or critical view of SNAP, I'm, slightly tweaking how I'm talking about the SNAP program and highlighting different aspects. So, for supportive and neutral audiences who are going to be largely supportive of SNAP and fighting hunger in general through federal investment, it's important to highlight, how important the SNAP program is, how it's working effectively right now, but there are a lot of folks who are excluded. Benefits are not adequate enough, particularly with pandemic increases expiring. And that more needs to be done to increase investment and increase eligibility. Another thing to note is just, again, emphasize that those working in the private sector and nonprofit sector, they can't do this alone. It requires the federal government, state and governments to be big partners in this and provide a big investment in fighting food insecurity. Mention how the COVID-19 flexibilities and benefit increases kind of countered the rising food insecurity of the pandemic. Mention how there's additional ways to reduce bureaucracy, burdens, and stigma that needs to be done. There's also a big move towards bringing folks with lived experience to the table to talk about the story. So we're seeing that more across the anti-hunger world, just direct engagement with policymakers, stories, testimonies, quotes. All of these things are really important and have big influence, I think, on policymakers in general. Can you go to the next 2 slides? And want to go over quickly key points for those who are critical of the SNAP program. And this is an area where I focus more on dealing with working in Congress, lobbying with bipartisan audiences and working to engage with Republican offices particularly. It's important to know going into it kind of what points will be important to emphasize. One one thing I always tell people is remember at the base level, Republicans, Democrats, they all support SNAP program. It's just a matter where they differ is how much and who is eligible. I know those differences can be big and they can be have a huge impact, but at the end of the day, they both support the program. So it's a focus on advocating to keep the program strong and advocating for how the program already works and how reducing eligibility or reducing the spending will harm individuals and individual groups. Another thing to note is that cuts in SNAP were very unpopular. And when they were proposed in 2018, 2019, there was a big sense that American public did not support these changes. A poll in 18, for example, showed 61% opposed cutting SNAP. Folks are largely opposed. Majority of folks are largely opposed to cutting SNAP, and a slimmer majority, but majority nonetheless, are supportive of increasing SNAP benefits. So these are widely popular programs. It's always important to remind those critical of the program of this. SNAP is also one of the most responsive federal programs. If you're thinking about speaking to a conservative lawmaker who's worried about government overreach or the government programs not being responsive, SNAP is very responsive. Costs go up, responds to economic conditions very well, better than a lot of other programs. Important to mention that. A big focus for House Republicans will be countering inflation. So important to note that SNAP helps families and individuals deal with the effects of inflation and food prices. When talking about work requirements, it's important to reiterate that SNAP, break those misconceptions that SNAP fosters dependency, and that the SNAP promotes work, and that increased work requirements can provide more harm than good. There's a lot of recent research out on this about the negative effects that work requirements can have on individuals and their economic mobility trajectory upward. That's important to share those with those critical and those wanting to increase those work requirements. Next slide. And just some other brief points here. Health and nutrition will be a big concern for House Republicans going into this. And some folks will propose restricting SNAP choice. Need to reiterate that this is counterproductive, harms independence and dignity for recipients. SNAP by itself already increases nutritional outcomes for those who were enrolled in the program. Want to stress the importance of the 50 food plan update, and talk about different others harms of bureaucracy. SNAP effects in rural and senior communities, since a lot of Republicans in Congress represent districts that have high levels of rural population. Focusing on those areas can be very helpful. And we'll go to the last slide, and we'll go to the Q&A section since I ran a bit over time. So feel free to add some questions in the chat, or you can go off mute and ask a question verbally if you would like. Can take a few questions here if anybody has them.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. And just a reminder to everyone, if you'd like to drop in a question to the right of the viewing window, you can drop it in the chat or the Q&A tab. You're also welcome to unmute if you have any questions for our speaker.
All right, so it seems like there aren't any questions. So I just want to end this presentation just with thanking everybody for listening, and hopefully, as mentioned before, my contact info. Jen, is there anywhere for me to share my contact info if anybody wants to follow up?
Yes, we can drop that in the chat, and then when folks come back to view the session, it will be listed in there as well.
Great. Well, thanks so much. Again, if you want to follow up and reach out to hear about more about the presentation or hear about more about our organization is doing during the Farm Bill process, feel free to reach out to me, and I hope that y'all have a great afternoon.
Thank you so much, Jonathan, for your presentation. Everyone, up next is an opportunity to meet with other summit participants through networking opportunities. So to join that, just click networking in your navigation bar to the left of your screen and click join. That concludes the workshop. So to exit the session, please click on the red phone icon at the bottom of your screen now and then leave. Have a great rest of your day. All right, good job, Jonathan. I'm going to jump off. You did great.
Thanks, Jenna. Appreciate your help with this.
Absolutely. Nice work, and thanks for all the work you do. Appreciate it.
Take care.
Bye-bye.